Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is something that I know at least a few of you have been waiting for quite a while. To quickly give you some background, about a year ago, before I set off on my ride from Chennai to Nepal and, well, as it turned out, the border of Bhutan, I made some modifications on my bike, Faith, as I call her, a Royal Enfield Thunderbird 500. Now, if you haven't already seen the video about the modifications on the bike, or you're new to the channel, I would suggest that you watch that video first, because then you will get an idea of what changes were made and why they were made. If it's not here as a card, it will be a link in the description, so head on over there and take a look at that video first. In this video, we're just talking about my feedback of the different changes that I made on the motorcycle after 1 year. I've ridden maybe 15-20,000 kilometers and ridden across countries, so a lot of time spent with these changes. Most of the changes on the bike were made in the front, because that's the part where you interact with the motorcycle the most in terms of riding position, and then there are a few changes for luggage at the back, so we will try to be methodical about this. So, front, going top to bottom, the first and most noticeable change is the handlebar. I removed the stock Thunderbird cruiser style handlebar and replaced it with an aftermarket RD style handlebar, as they call it. So the idea was to straighten posture, make it a little bit more upright, and also straighten out my wrists. And in terms of posture, that's definitely worked. It's made the riding position a lot more comfortable, but the specific handlebar that I chose may not have been the right one. As it would turn out, it's quite light overall. It's not as heavy as the stock handlebar, and that makes a huge difference, because if you've ever ridden, or if you own a Thunderbird 500 at least, you know that it's a vibrating machine. It's actually unreal just how much this bike vibrates. But having bought this bike, I've lived with my mistake, and I've done a lot with this motorcycle, but the vibrations have been a constant challenge, not only in terms of ride comfort, but also in terms of sort of the longevity of parts, because the vibrations damage a lot. So this handlebar on its own, maybe on a different motorcycle would work, but on this bike, because of the vibrations and the fact this is a light handlebar, it makes it quite uncomfortable. The way out is probably to get something a little bit more heavy, or find a way to make this handlebar more heavy. It's something I didn't want to experiment with while I was on the road, because the handlebar is a crucial part of your safety on a motorcycle. So I kind of stuck with it. Maybe eventually, if I'm planning to use the bike for another ride, I will do something to change the handlebar. Moving one notch down, we get to the headlight assembly, as you can see with that little ring around it on right now. Now, a lot of people have asked me whether this LED headlamp is actually any good, and I would say that in this context, it's basically relative. Compared to the stock headlamp that you get on the bike, this is way better, and it has been reliable. So it doesn't give you a focus beam, it doesn't have a spot, it's more like a floodlight, and the throw is by no means regulated, which is a bit problematic. But compared to what I had earlier, this is definitely way better, and I'm glad I made this change. And it has been reliable, unlike my aux lights. So this is something that I would recommend. The headlight grille is more protective and sort of aesthetic. That's been great as well. It's not been problematic, no vibrations, no noise, nothing coming loose. So I've been happy with that. It does get a little bit challenging to clean the headlamp when you have the grille on, but that's not a big problem really. And overall, the headlight setup is something that worked out well. Moving a little bit further down, we get to the fork gaiters on my shock absorbers. Fork gaiters are something that I should have probably been using for a long time by now, but I just simply didn't know that we could get them here in India. And eventually, when I found them, it was a no-brainer to put them on the bike. In the past, I think in 2016 and 2018, possibly also on my tour of 2017, I've had fork seal issues. It's been a common issue with the Thunderbird for me. So getting fork gaiters on was a no-brainer. And these have actually worked really well. I like the look of this rubber fork gaiter system. The problem with it though is that over prolonged use and exposure to the elements, rubber tends to crack, and as you can see on the gaiters on my bike now, both sides have cracked and they will need to be replaced, but they're relatively inexpensive, so I don't really mind replacing them every year. The problem is more in terms of the process of replacement, because you need to open up your shocks and slip these in. In that sense, having something sort of wrap around the shocks and don't really need you to open up the shock system might be more convenient. But on a retro motorcycle like this, I think this looks better. So even if it's a little bit of work, these are good to have. And I should mention, of course, that with the Gaiters on, I had no fork seal issues on my ride, even though I was riding on some insane terrain through my travel on 2019. Speaking of insane terrain, the other big change, which are the tires on the motorcycle. This time around, I chose to go with the Timsun tires, and these have just blown my mind. They are heavier tires and they are definitely significantly more expensive than the Michelins and the MRFs, but these tires just change the ride experience. A lot more ride comfort and much better control of the motorcycle and much better grip. Maybe it's something that deserves a review, a detailed review in itself, but definitely a very good decision. I was very happy with the Timsun tires. I just realized that I completely forgot to mention anything about the knuckle guards on the handlebar. They are actually the one thing that I did right on the handlebar setup. These have been supremely useful. Again, because of the vibrations on the bike, nuts and bolts tend to come loose. You need to tighten them on occasion and just check them. But again, when I've dropped the bike, they've kept the levers safe and they've held up through all kinds of abuse. So in that whole handlebar setup, the thing that I did right was definitely the knuckle guards. Those I would recommend. I did also put an exhaust strap onto the bike. It's actually a mistake I made in 2016 that I've had to live with ever since then. I would not recommend using exhaust strap, at least what we get in India, because they just ruin the finish on your exhaust pipes. And as you can see on mine, the pipe is just absolutely ruined, and ever since I put on the first exhaust strap, I've had to keep putting it back on just to hide the pipe. It's not something I would suggest that you do unless you really like that look and you're willing to commit to it and you're willing to replace it at least once a year, if not more. Then maybe it's something you can do, but otherwise stay away from it. On the rear, there aren't really that many changes that I made. I changed the tail rack and the backrest, and I also added a saddle stay. Those are the two things that I did. And to it's a very, very simple piece of gear to add to a motorcycle. It's just a simple frame, but it goes such a long way when you're using throwover saddlebags. It just makes life so much simpler. Throw it on. Generally, previously, before I put the saddle stay on, there was always a concern about where my bags were, what sort of angle they were tilting towards the wheel, because it's very easy during the course of a ride, especially when you're riding on bad roads, that eventually your saddlebags could get into a bit of a dangerous position too close to the tires. Once you've got the saddle stay on, it becomes so much easier and so much more comfortable and so much more peaceful. This particular stay from Viaterra is very minimalist. I like that about it, and it does the job, so that was a great decision. And similar with the rear carrier, actually, I think that it adds a more clean look to the back of the bike, and I realized I don't need too much storage behind the seat because I ride alone and I use the rear seat as a place for my tail bag. So behind it, I essentially just needed space to be able to tie up my tent and a few camping gear pieces. And so this little rack, it's a little bit too small, but you can manage. You can find a way to work around it. But it does make the motorcycle look better. And overall, it's worked very well. It was very easy to use and comfortable throughout this ride, even though I was on the road for almost 3 months. This was enough, given the setup that I had of throwover saddlebags, the tail bag, and then just a few pieces of gear tied on at the back over here. The only thing with this, of course, is that, again, possibly connected to the vibrations on the motorcycle, one of the brackets did break. It's something that I could have welded back at some point. I haven't yet really bothered to do it because it's still secured at 3 places and the rack is slightly bent. So eventually I'll need to straighten it and then I will weld it back on, and hopefully then it should be fine. So that in a nutshell is my feedback on the changes that I made to my motorcycle, the modifications for touring that I made to the Royal Enfield Thunderbird 500. Overall, I would say that most of it has worked out well. The handlebar setup is something that definitely needs work. The rest of it has done what I had hoped it would do. at least to 90% efficiency. So I'm glad I made these changes. Most of it I would recommend. Just see what works for you. That's what I would always say. When you're modifying a bike, it's always about customization, and when you're customizing, it makes sense to customize to your own personal preference. So think about that, and hopefully you found some of this information useful in arriving at the decisions that you might make to make your motorcycle more comfortable for you. If you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoy the content I create, then please do hit subscribe and click on the notification button and become a part of this channel and the content that I create and the stories that I share. Thank you for making the time to watch this video, and I will catch you in the next one.